Pathological fear. Why is fear always so present in our lives? What makes the difference and the unknown so terrifying? Is fear something inflicted into us, into our nature? Or is it something that we learn as we grow up, in the same way in which we learn our ABCs? What happens when we face our fears? Can we get over them? Fear of the dark. Fear of the monsters under our bed. Fear of pain. Fear of colors. Fear of clothes. Fear of harm coming towards the people we love. Fear of words. Fear of those words then forming sentences that then may become ideas that may contradict my own. Fear of who's above. Fear of who's below. Fear of company. Fear of solitude. Fear of me. Fear of them. It is always there. Sometimes to the point it takes total control over our lives. I have to admit something. About 10 years ago, I was boarding a plane outside Colombia. I was already in my seat when I looked up and I saw a tall man wearing a long white gown and a turban. This was a person from a completely foreign culture to mine, someone I had never had any previous interaction with. Because of that, almost like an instinct, I remembered the news, the radio, that one comment a family member made about it, or what my friends said about it at school. Because of that, even if it was just for a brief moment, I felt scared. We live in a world where Islam is the second most followed religion, with 1.3 billion people following it. Where 244 million people, or 3.3% of the global population, don't live in their country of origin anymore. Where 9 million people, which is roughly the population of New Jersey, identify as part of the LGBT community in the United States only. How can we still call these groups of people minorities? Maybe this is true in the context of our individual lifestyles. But other than that, don't you think that maybe we are the minorities? I believe that pathological fear can turn us into violent beings, and that sometimes that violence can be directed against those who are different than us. Before anything, I want to clarify the implicit importance of fear. Fear is a primary emotion that has been with us ever since the beginning of our rational thinking. It is within the same range of emotion as happiness, sadness, and anger. It is there to help us identify and avoid fear, which means that without it, we could have not been able to identify predators or create precaution towards specific situations, and ultimately, we would have not been able to survive as a species. I guarantee it. It is also out of fear that we thrive to be greater at whatever we're doing. Have you ever wondered why before presenting a big project, you always feel nervous? Or why, even if you know your information well and you have practiced 1 billion times, you still feel that incessant tingling in the back of your neck? I don't know, like me right now? Even if fear can be a natural emotion that can sometimes even be healthy for us, we need to understand that when it becomes constant, irrational, and felt at unreasonably high scales, we have just crossed a very thin and delicate line from healthy fear to pathological fear, from the emotion to the torment. There are 3 ways in which people react to fear. They either try to avoid it, they surrender to it, or they attack. To explain this better, I am going to use the classical conception of prey and predator in the wild. When a zebra is being chased by a lion, its first instinct will be to run as fast as it possibly can to escape the danger somehow. After that, when there is no more use in running, it will try to attack by whichever means possible. It may try to bite, it may try to kick, and lastly, there will come a time where the zebra surrenders to whatever the danger is and simply stops fighting. I usually don't like to compare human and animal behavior for obvious reasons, but in this case, the similarities are just too many and too obvious to ignore. Inevitably, fear is an instinct. we feel we get these different types of reactions depending on our personalities or the amount of threat that the situation represents. Today, I am going to talk to you about that fear that makes us have violent reactions, where we feel the need to attack in order to eradicate whoever is causing us fear or whatever we consider to be a threat. Because I firmly believe that it is out of this that we created this. But where does this fear come from? Let's all close our eyes and imagine, just for a moment, that we were raised into a family where minorities and their customs are considered strange or even dangerous. Oh yes, honey, all Latinos are gardeners. Or, I just simply do not understand how a man can love another man and a woman can love another woman. It grosses me out. It's wrong. When we grow up with warnings about staying away from something or someone, and we only accompany that with stories that support those warnings, we will inevitably be afraid of it. But there will come a time in our lives where we have to be exposed to all kinds of people from all kinds of cultures in a situation we cannot control. And guess what we're gonna feel when we're faced with someone who we have been warned about our whole lives? For some people, because they consider whoever they are encountering a threat, out of an irrational fear only fed by misconceptions and offensive stereotypes, we attack. We attack with the intention of eradicating or eliminating whatever we consider to be the threat. In Colombia, we usually have an expression that says, "Esta es la cruz que tengo que cargar." This is the cross I have to carry, the burden I have to take with me my whole life, the demons I have to fight. With absolutely no doubt in my mind, fear and insecurities are my everlasting enemies. They are the cross that I am gonna have to carry with me my whole life. And different to the people who I have been talking to you about for the last, 10 minutes, I react to fear in the complete opposite way. I either try to escape it or I surrender to it. Coming from a family and a surrounding filled with strong, feisty Latino women who won't take no for an answer, and relentless men who will do anything to defend who they love and what they believe in. And then there's me. Someone who fears the idea of being wrong about what she thinks, who paralyzes to the thought of losing her loved ones only for raising her voice. Fear is indeed my eternal burden, and it has held me down and prevented me from moving forward so many times. I have lost so much energy trying to escape it, and I have lost so much time being captive to it. And quite frankly, I think I'm tired of it. I felt like a coward, an outsider, someone who could just hope of being like her friends and family who I thought fought out of courage and tenacity. But one day, actually the day in which I researched the ways in which people react to fear, a thought crossed my mind. What if they're fighting out of fear? I thought this to be the most ridiculous thought I ever had. Fear? Fear of what? How could someone so self-secure and persistent be doing anything out of fear? But then I looked closely, and I analyzed, and I listened, and I found so much vulnerability in their fighting causes and so much raw fear in them. Fear of losing who they love, fear of change. I'm sorry, does anything of this sound familiar to you? Then I discovered that one of her biggest weaknesses of our biggest strengths was also one of her biggest weaknesses. Then I looked at it at a higher scale and discovered a country segregated by fear, involved in an eternal conflict imposed by the idea of accepting others' point of view for once. We are a broken country, and fear won't let us fix it. But please don't get me wrong, this is not only something that happens in Colombia. This is a worldwide phenomenon. Countries, socially, economically, and politically segregated, run by fear. So please, let me rephrase my sentence. We are a broken world, and fear won't let us fix it. But how? How can we fix it? One of the first, and what I believe want to be the most important of all the recuperation steps, or of the diminishing of fear and its rationalization, is the recognition of fear itself. This can be also one of the hardest steps, especially for the people who react aggressively to fear. Because for millions of years, in all cultures at a global scale, fear has always been a sign of weakness and vulnerability. That two characteristics that us, proud and powerful human beings, have always been afraid of showing, because it is degrading to show our so-called weaknesses to others, because it is degrading to show the purest part of ourselves to other people. It is the ticking time bomb of the recovery process. If it is imposed to someone or handled in the wrong way, then comes the phase of exposition. By exposition, I mean getting to talk to that Asian boy in your class, researching about the Hindu religion to understand what the heck those pictures in my colleague's desk actually mean, interacting somehow with my transgender neighbor. With these interactions, a person can gather what I and specialists around the world refer to as evidence. Evidence to prove themselves firsthand that the generalization of entire religions, ethnic groups, and nationalities are not realistic. These exposition techniques have shown to be effective to people from all ages. Could you start to dream? Could you start to imagine what they could do to people in their earliest years? Exposing kids from a young age to an environment with different peoples and cultures in it will by consequence make them more accepting and tolerant human beings in the future. Now, the most logical environment for this exposition to happen at is at a classroom environment. And no, I am not only talking about uniting kids from different cultures in a classroom. It would be ideal. But I understand that in this world, sometimes that is not an option. I also refer to making them research about foreign culture so that they are not later blinded by stereotypes. Teaching them not to generalize an individual, not to judge an individual based on these stereotypes. Making them aware, even from a young age, that, about the problems our society is currently facing and how they can fix it. Yes, you might be wondering, and it is true. These are techniques that are already being implemented in schools worldwide, including my own. But with the times we're currently facing, a short 20-minute assembly each month or so, or I don't know, maybe an independent research project that students are just not gonna care about in the long run are not enough. We need to prioritize this type of education almost as much as we prioritize academic subjects, because it will always be better to have a good, kind-hearted child than one who knows the periodic table by heart. We have been educated into this culture based on fear and prejudice. Now, let's educate ourselves out of it. Courage, audacity, determination, the realization that fears are like obstacles in horseback riding. Their sole purpose in our lives are for us to gracefully jump over them. Here present, I see generations that have had to endure a lot of violence in many different forms throughout their whole lives. All kinds of brutal conflicts that can now, in part, be explained by one simple, basic emotion. A violence driven by fear that can be overcome by the only things that differentiates us from animals: our rational capacities, our urge to love, to understand, to be better, to educate and be educated. It is an absolute necessity to be able to overcome this barrier that we have built based on fear between us and those who are different than us. Fear can be accepted, rationalized, and eventually overcome. Believe me, I've been there. I know that heart-wrenching, gut-wrenching, absolutely horrific feeling more than anything. But I also know it can be overcome. I believe that we can overcome this pathological fear by exposing ourselves to that fear and eventually rationalizing it. I believe that we can do this through education. It's time to apply that courage, that grit, to fight the real enemy within us. Let us fight it instead of fighting one another. It is time, today, right now, to be those brave men and women that we thrive so much to be, and that I know that deep down inside, we all are. Because we are a broken world, and fear won't let us fix it. Thank you very much.